Welcome to another episode of the People Over Perks podcast by Leapsome. In each episode, we interview an HR or people operations leader about how they're building a high-performance culture in their company. On today's show, we have Michael Nicodemus, Director of People Growth and Development at Vinted. We speak to Michael about how he's been implementing people growth and impact cycles, Vinted's approach to learning, servant leadership, and much more. Enjoy the show. Okay, Michael, thanks for joining us today on the People Over Perks podcast. Really excited to have you join us today.
Awesome. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for the invite, Andy. I know it's been a long time in the making, right?
It has been a long time in the making, yeah, absolutely. And we've got some really interesting topics lined up for today. So really looking forward to diving into your career history, a bit about all of the things that you're working on at Vinted. And so to kick off, I'd love to hear from you about your career history so far. You've taken a pretty interesting path, and I understand a bit of a diversion around 2018. And so we'd love to hear from you, how you've ended up where you are today.
Sure. Yeah. There is definitely a diversion around 2018. Most of my career is not in a people function or an HR function. By title, it's not in a people function or HR function, but I'll explain that in a moment. My background is really in the commercial side of organizations. So I was with behemoths like Starbucks for 9 years, and then Nike for 7 years, with like a 2-year stint in the middle with a small fashion startup in Brooklyn. I was responsible for direct-to-consumer markets with Nike most recently. So leading pretty large teams, 250, 300 people, macroeconomic climate, responsible for driving that top line revenue and controlling costs to contribute to, bottom line profitability or EBIT. But I kind of fell into that career. That career was by accident. Started out just slinging some coffee while I was in college with Starbucks. And by the time I graduated, I was kind of down this fast track path into more mid-level management and this sort of thing. And so kind of rode that out because I was having a lot of fun. I enjoyed it and I was good at it. So like I said, I kind of fell into that more or less by accident and did it for probably about 15 years. But because it was by accident, I never stopped and really thought about, well, why do you, in a meaningful way, in a deep, prolonged period way, never stopped and thought about, why do I do what I do? Why am I good at what I do? And, why do you get up in the morning? Or in my case, like with Nike, we'll get on the plane, or get off the plane, because I traveled a lot. And it all came back to people, right? So when your title of this podcast is People Over Perks, my approach to leadership was people over everything else. So when it comes to driving revenue through the consumer experience, when it comes to driving revenue through a great product assortment, when it comes to controlling costs through operational efficiency, et cetera, all of those things take care of themselves if you focus on the people you're hiring, how you're organizing those people you hire, and then how you develop and strategize that talent agenda, right? And so as a leader, I spent 2/3 of my time probably talking with the managers and the leaders that reported into me about their people and how they're thinking about their people as it relates to their business, and that they have the right people doing the right things to deliver on what we need to do, right? And so when it came time to maybe think about doing a shift, I was working with a coach, and the coach kind of nudged me, though coaches aren't necessarily supposed to nudge you that hard, in the direction of like an HR function, because of the way I approached leadership and the adjacency of my experience as a leader. And so, I'm about 3-4 years into experimenting now in the people domain dedicatedly. As I said before, I didn't have people in my title in the past, but obviously I led very much with a people first mentality as a market leader. And now I'm kind of experimenting on how I can help organizations and other leaders do kind of similarly to what I did.
Very cool. Thank you for that introduction. And now you find yourself at Vinted. I understand you've been there for around a year now.
Yeah, a year in, let me check the date. They're in like 2-3 weeks. It's pretty soon.
Very cool. Got that anniversary coming up.
Yeah.
And before we dive into, what your role is at Vinted, maybe you can just give the audience an overview as to what Vinted is as a business.
Sure. So Vinted is Consumer to consumer or person to person platform for predominantly secondhand fashion. So I have this shirt and I don't love it as much as I used to, or I don't wear it anymore because I've outgrown it, whatever the reason. I can, with the snap of a button, click of an app, put it up for sale. And then you, Andy, can be like, I really want a new polo, and you're flipping through and you're like, oh, I love that. And you buy it. And then we exchange it. Right. So I ship it to you, you send money through Vinted, and it's all done through the platform. And so we are present in the majority of Europe and also in 2 countries in North America. So we're present in both the United States and Canada. Been around since 2008. And we are based in Lithuania is where our headquarters is, where we're about 1,000 people strong there. And then we have about 200 others scattered around Europe. And yeah, it's really cool. While I say what our platform is secondhand fashion is predominantly, I'd say that's our bread and butter, but really what we're all about is creating a world where sustainable consumption is the first choice, right? That it shouldn't be as hard as it is today to make purchase decisions that are sustainable and environmentally sound, or at least not as environmentally detrimental as things are today. And so that's what we're striving for. And then where we're just starting is the secondhand fashion market, but we're already creeping into other spaces and other lines.
Yeah, super interesting, and yeah, as you say, definitely impactful in today's world. And so yeah, we'd love to now learn a little bit more about your role. Then, give us an overview as to the things that you're responsible for and that you've been working on. And then the second part to that question is what enticed you to join Vinted in the first place?
Let's do the second part first, because then that informs the story of what I do in my role. I guess. So what enticed me to join Vinted is kind of 2 things. One is that purpose I just talked about. Just with everyone I met throughout the interview process, it showed up in one way or another that this organization is purpose driven, right? Like it was evident profit fuels that purpose. Not that the purpose is just this cute little thing on the wall that we tell people while we're out here to really make a lot of money, right? It's evident that we're striving to be a social enterprise and do both. And so that was really attractive from an organizational point of view. Then from a function or role point of view, it was really exciting because it was a chance to build something out from scratch almost. So the company, by the time I joined, was already around 800, 900 people. And there was one person working in what you would traditionally call learning and development. And I was hired to build out that function to be, the L&D function, but even broader. We ultimately got to even create our own name. We ended up landing on people growth and development is the name of our function. But that's how minuscule it was, or absent it was, is that you got to name ourselves because we were creating a totally new function for the organization. So that was super interesting to me because, again, as I mentioned, I'm in a transition, so I'm still new in this HR space. And so I'd done some stuff with consulting, which is where you go in and help people, tell them how they should maybe fix or improve things, and then you disappear. Did that for like 1.5 years. And then I was in-house with another company, but it was already further along in its growth than Vinted was or is. And so there I was already a lot of things were already built, and my role was about iterate and evolve, which was still also very cool, taking things that worked for 1,000 people and now make them work for 4,000 people. But Vinted was really attractive in the sense that there's just almost nothing, right? Or at least nothing consistent across the organization. And so that attracted me to the opportunity. Now back to your first part of the first question is, what does my role do? Yeah, so I lead the people growth and development team here at Vinted. And so we work in a few spaces. So one of the big things we provide for the organization is onboarding, right? So cultural induction and organizational induction, and then also giving guidance to functional induction. We also support leadership development. And that's a work in progress, as leadership is always a work in progress, and there's no one's ever done there, right? But most specifically, because we've grown so much, we have a lot of transitioning leaders who might be going from not being a leader before into becoming a leader. And so we build things out for them to help them through that transition. Additionally, because we're growing so much, we hire a lot of experienced leaders who have very specific needs. So for them, we don't try to make a cookie cutter program of here is what it means to be a leader at Vinted and put you all through this. And you may know half of it, half of it you may not, and you're bored half of the time and engage the other half of the time, but really creating an environment where they can own their own development and identify where they need to grow as leaders. Then the other big piece is performance management, or what is traditionally called performance management elsewhere. We refrain from using that term super often in the organizations because it does have almost a negative connotation now, because performance management's just been so bad for so long that it's, you say that and it's just like, oh, 3-hour long conversations with 20-page documents of everything I did for the last year that I won't remember 95% of the second I get out of this chat. And that's right. So my team's also responsible for driving that experience as well.
Understood. Thank you. And what is the structure of your team? And how does that fit more broadly within the organization?
Yeah. So structure of my team is, well, I'm kind of leaning on like two ways to answer that for you. So one is we try to operate like a product team, right? So we see what we deliver to the organizations as products. And so we work in sprints. We have product roadmaps based on what we're sense making from the organization where we can help. And then how we're structured to deliver those things is we have people who kind of have domain expertise. So we've got a couple people that work in leadership. We've got a couple of people that are working in performance management. We've got a couple of people that work on onboarding, and then we cross-pollinate where there is times to cross-pollinate on that product development, right? When you think performance management, but also leadership, there's lots of cross-pollination there. So maybe one person is owning a particular product, but is working with 2 or 3 other people on the team to build that experience out and that product out, or that learning out, right?
Okay, understood. And what's the vision? Where do you want your team to get to, and what does success look like for you?
Oh wow. Well, oddly, success is almost being experienced for me right now as a leader. So I'm going to speak selfishly as a leader, and then I can speak organizationally. So for me as a leader, it's building a team that I'm obsolete, that they just don't need me anymore, to really still continue to deliver high quality products to the organization that are what the organization need when they need it, right? To help fuel the organization's performance. And right now, because I'm actually in a stretch assignment right now. So now this isn't even my day job anymore. The team is really doing that. They're really becoming a self-organized team. And so it's really great to see that. When we talk about organizationally, our team's vision, and not everyone, we haven't really publicly announced this at Vinted. So it's actually kind of our quiet vision is an anti-fragile Vinted is what our team aspires to help create, right? So I don't know, for your listeners, there's all this talk about resiliency. There's robustness, right? And there's fragility, and then there's this whole other idea of around anti-fragility, which is beyond resilience, because resilience is bouncing back from when you have a setback, right? It's just getting back to the status quo is what resiliency is. Like, businesses are here, COVID hits, and they dropped here. And if they're resilient, they bounce back up to exactly where they were before. Where an anti-fragile organization is, they're here, COVID hits, but then they come back and they're here. Or COVID hits and they go here. I'm using COVID as an example because it was a major shock to almost every industry and every organization. And those that are anti-fragile actually grew and were stronger because of COVID, where resilient organizations just bounce back. So my team, nothing can be perfectly anti-fragile. It just doesn't exist, right? So when we say we aspire to help facilitate a vision of an anti-fragile Vinted, really, I should probably put an asterisk there and say, and as anti-fragile as possible Vinted, right? But that's what our team is the future state would look like when we're talking 3-4 years from now, is what we've helped facilitate the creation of.
Yeah, really interesting. And I love this idea as well of of your team operating like a product team, and delivering products to the organization, there seems to be a real shift that many more teams are operating like this. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what are some of these products that you've been delivering within the year that you've now been with Vinted. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the performance piece. I know you mentioned that you're trying to avoid the phrase performance management broadly, but yeah, maybe we can dive into that a bit, and you can tell us about some of the things that you've been working on, and those products that you've been delivering.
Sure. So yeah, let's start with let's start with performance management. So that's been a labor of love for several months now. So we started working on that, probably August of last year. The company had nothing consistency, but it existed in different departments. They had their own models, and some had some very well thought out and robust models of what was working for them. Some had absolutely nothing at all. And so there was just really some inconsistency in how that was being approached. And so we've been spending quite a bit of time understanding what's happening, what's working for the organization, what's not working, and then department by department, but then also pulling back and seeing, okay, what is needed for the organization overall to help fuel Vinted's growth, right? To help us progress towards that mission of sustainable consumption being the first choice. And we have a really cool opportunity to build a performance management model that is intended to drive the performance of the organization, right? And that's the lens we've been thinking through, is through the individuals, because that's what you work with in performance management model, is through working with creating a process, an experience for those individuals, how we can best ensure alignment, prioritization, and drive towards Vinted's North Star. And so we've really tried to be somewhat progressive in it, in the sense we've partnered with some external consultants that have expertise in neuropsychology and neuroscience to try to help us think through what is the most human way to engage in something like performance management. Like if the ultimate outcome is people kicking some ass in their role and doing an amazing job, what enables people to kick butt and do an amazing job, right? What's behind that, and how can we structurally create that? And so, it's been taking some iteration and involvement, and still not fully dialed. But yeah, so we've ultimately gotten to a place where we have some things that feel traditional and some things that are maybe a little bit more progressive, but still not super progressive, because we are an organization that's not coming from an existing model and then transforming it. It is building from scratch. And so there is some almost scaffolding we think about that we have to put in place that maybe one day will come away. I don't know how in detail do you want me to go into kind of the elements of it and that sort of thing?
We'd love you to talk a little bit more about some of these, perhaps more traditional parts that you've kept in place, and then the things that you feel are more novel.
Yeah, sure. So I think let's start with 360. So 360 is a little bit more traditional, right? Mm-hmm. But how we're tweaking it is we are removing it from 360 right before you get your performance review, or 360 right before you're getting a promotion. Now, those incidents may still happen, but the intent is for 360s to be separated from those so they can be safer, right? Mm-hmm. When you're doing a 360 right before a review, the person who's giving you, the people who are giving you feedback, know it's going right towards your review, which may determine your promotion or determine your salary, that sort of thing. So they already know that, right? So that's already a bias that could be creeping in there that's skewing the feedback they're giving you. But B, when you get it, you're also, like it or not, even meant to, if you're front of mind, you really want this feedback, there's part of your brain that's detecting a threat response, because it does impact potentially things like money and promotion, which is livelihood. And so even as much as you want to hear the feedback, you may not absorb it and process it and internalize it enough to where it's actually something you apply later on. And so we've taken 360s and we've moved them away from that. Another piece with 360s that, again, it's a traditional element that we're trying to break down, is that they're not done simultaneously. That's a huge, annoying organizational burden. And most places are like 360s all at once, which means everybody is writing self-reviews and feedback for other people, which either means you're getting crappy feedback or work is suffering so people can write good feedback, or people are suffering so they can maintain the work and write good feedback. And it's just a huge organizational burden. And so we're removing that piece and setting it to where the person has the ownership of when they trigger a 360 in alignment with their leader. Because people also evolve and grow at different rates depending on what they're working on and what stage they are in their development. And so people don't also need 360s all at the same time. Every 6 month cadence, time for a new 360. If I'm going through a lot of transition, maybe I need 360 like 3 months after I just got the last one, right? To see how some things have changed. Or maybe, especially if I'm people who are further in their careers, the things they're developing and working on take longer to adopt and change. So maybe at 6 months, they don't need a new 360 because they're going to get the same thing they got as feedback 6 months ago, but maybe at 9 months, they're ready, right? So really putting ownership in the people's hands of when is the time right for them in their development to solicit 360 feedback from people to see the ways they can potentially continue to grow and the things that they should continue to do really well that they're doing already. Another aspect that is maybe somewhat traditional, but also novel, is the idea of anytime feedback. Mm-hmm. We, like a lot of organizations, really have embraced radical candor by Kim Scott and that whole idea. But even Kim says you've got to get it before you give it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of organizations just go out and are like, radical candor, let's just dole it out, right? Again, you're creating this threat response. If I'm not expecting you to come over here and tell me that I smell bad, it's going to throw me off that you're coming here telling me that I smell bad. Even if you have the best intentions, right? It's still going to put me in potentially a little bit of a defensive state or a threat state, and might hinder me from really absorbing or appreciating the thing you're telling me. And it took you a lot of courage to tell me that I smell bad. So don't want to waste that, right? And so while we do want unsolicited feedback at Vinted, a big piece that, and we do have a lot of unsolicited feedback at Vinted because it's healthy, is we really want to build a continuous feedback culture that's actually predicated on asking for feedback. Mm-hmm. Because when a person asks for it, they're already far more open and ready to receive maybe the critical or constructive things. Well, constructive can be positive or negative. The critical or opportunistic feedback you might have for me versus if it's just coming out of nowhere and thrown at us, right? So we're really trying to build an experience that people are asking for feedback, and the expectation is that you're seeking feedback, not waiting for feedback to come to you, and using anytime feedback to seek how your peers are feeling and thinking about you.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And how are you trying to encourage people to seek that feedback?
Well, so it's education, right? Because it's a change of mindset. So first and foremost is educating people. So because you get requests for feedback training, which, yes, you need to be trained how to give good feedback, but because the emphasis is always on the give, not the getting, that we are, as we roll out performance management to the various departments and this aspect of it, this continuous feedback element of it, we're educating on why it's beneficial to actually ask for the feedback versus waiting for it to come to you, right? And then we're also creating learning experiences that merge both what are good ways to ask for feedback, because much like giving feedback, there's good and bad ways to give feedback. There's also good and bad ways to ask for feedback. Mm-hmm. And so really giving guidance to people on here are good practices when it comes to soliciting feedback, so you get the most meaningful thing from people, right? Because it's also hard for the person to give feedback too. It's almost just as, in behavioral science has shown, it's almost as threatening, sometimes even more threatening for the person that's delivering that really difficult feedback as it is for the person to hear it, right? So you got an experience where both people are like on threat alert and uncomfortable. And so again, how you ask for feedback can also help take down the guard for the person who's giving the feedback too. So you really get some good stuff from that person too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also you mentioned the emphasis on making sure that there's alignment across the whole organization as well. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one aspect that's we're going to start out with, or we're starting out with, is kind of quarterly alignment for individuals on where their priorities should be, right? So we're calling these things impact goals. And the name of our whole performance management model is the people growth and impact cycle, right? And growth and impact are intentionally separate, even though super connected, of course. But in this experience, they are separated from a process point of view. So quarterly alignment, meaning, at least at Vinted and any other tech place I've worked, scale up, everybody at any moment has 70 to 130 things they can be working on, right? And so it's creating a forum and experience for team members and their leaders to align at least at a minimum of a quarterly cadence. It can be more often, especially in teams that are working in agile methods, but a minimum of a quarterly cadence. People are sitting down together and talking about, here are the 2 or 3, 4 big things I'm getting after, or my high priorities for this quarter that I want to really try to get after from a delivery or results or an outcome point of view, right? Mm-hmm. It does not necessarily mean it's everything you're doing for this quarter, but it's a chance for that person, their leader, to align and ensure that they both are on the same page around what is most important for this person. And then what can be inputs for those impact goals could be obviously team OKRs, right? So we align at team level and by function and department level, and ultimately business unit and then company, through OKRs, right? So aggregations through OKRs, but when it comes to the individual, that stops. But we can look, because OKRs are team goals, but there can be instances I'm like, well, what's your role in helping drive this objective, right? Or what is your contribution? So that could be one input rather. Also is business as usual, right? As we start to get bigger and bigger, we have a lot of roles that are moving into, maybe they don't work so much on OKRs, but they have a lot of really important business as usual activities. So what are those targets, goals, things you're going to accomplish, deliver, or just whatever else is the priority, side projects, team related projects, whatever the case is, right? But just ensuring that leader and that person have that alignment, right? And that they're talking about it. So we know what we're doing together versus everyone kind of going willy-nilly.
Yeah. And so that is very much done through the individual and their direct manager then.
Yes.
Yeah. And I assume that that also then requires some coaching of the managers in order to help them, navigate these conversations.
It does. Well, not just the managers, both sides, right? Because it comes to what does good goal setting look like. So if we want people to own this, it's not the manager saying, here's your top 3 things. It's the person coming to the leader and saying, based on my role and what I see the team is working on, here are the 2, 3, 4 things I really want to say is the stake in the ground. This is what I'm getting after. These are my priorities this quarter. And it's really for the manager to then coach that individual on, high five, you're thinking the same thing I'm thinking, or, ooh, 2 of those are really way off, and having that conversation, right? And so it actually takes guidance and education for both on how to set really good goals, how to prioritize, but then on the leader standpoint, also a little bit of coaching education as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so on the topic of education, what is Vinted's approach to learning?
Yeah, so Vinted's approach to learning is I'm starting to sound like a little bit of a broken record. It's not too far off from performance management in the sense that it's putting it back in the ownership of the person's hands, right? So how does that look in practice is we have a really generous individual learning budget. I mean, market leader. I actually have never heard of a company that gives people as much as we do. And so that is for that individual to use however they need to facilitate their own development, their own professional and personal development. And so with that in mind, that takes a lot of burden off of an L&D, a traditional L&D function, to have a whole bunch of courses for individuals and a whole bunch of maybe a LinkedIn Learning or a Udemy and all this stuff, and provide all of these things, because we can put that in the hands of the people. And really where my function sits, and this links back to performance management, is helping people identify what do they need to work on, because then you've got this really awesome, generous learning budget you can spend, right? So when I was saying what my team does earlier, you didn't hear a lot of programs, you didn't hear a lot of courses or anything that we're creating, and it's intentional, because at least at the individuals, because at the individual level, we want people to have that ownership and they have that generous budget to use. We just need to make sure we help them have experiences and reflective moments with their leaders to understand where they can invest that time and energy and budget into.
Okay, that makes sense. Interesting. And so thinking about the way that you've set about building your team and approaching delivering products to the organization, what kind of metrics are you tracking, and how are you measuring the overall success of the various products that you're implementing?
Yeah, so this is a fun one, and I'm smiling because if my team were in front of me right now, they would be having a huge laugh, because they know this is a hot spot for me. And so when they listen to this, they know they will be chuckling. So right now, we're a new team and we're just now building out and delivering products. So what we aligned is basically 5 fundamental kind of questions or inquiries on every product that can be agnostic to whatever type of product we are delivering, to seek feedback on. One of them, being the NPS, right? So the promotion of whatever it is, be it a little baby e-learning that's 5 minutes, or if it is the first time leaders program launched into leadership, which lasts 3 months, right? You can still ask how people would recommend it to others. But we identified as a team basically 5 common questions that we ask of everything that we are delivering. So therefore we can then start to take those and aggregate them up to give us a holistic dashboard of the products we are delivering. We have not gotten to the point where we have enough data to aggregate up into a dashboard yet. But that's our approach to evaluation, is to have these commonalities so we can have this holistic pulse check of the team and aggregation. Then at the same time, for each individual product, beyond those 5 things, depending on the sophistication and the complexity of the product and the experience, then we would do further analysis for impact evaluation, right? So maybe we don't do a 3-month follow-up following a 20-minute e-learning, but we might do a 3-month follow-up following a 3-month first-time leaders program to really understand the behavioral impact that has had and the outcomes from it, right? Or same with, we offer a team-based feedback training. And so in that team-based feedback training, we may look at how did the team, in addition to those 5 standard questions, how was the team scoring in our internal questionnaire relating to feedback culture? And then has that metric or that needle moved for that team a couple months after they went through the experience, right? So it's really product by product, specific to what it is that is trying to accomplish, how we measure it. But we do have that consistency of those 5 reactionary engagement type of questions, usefulness type of questions, to be able to give ourselves at least that aggregation point across all things we do. I'll stop there.
Understood. Yeah, that makes sense. And is your team also then responsible for the measuring the wider employee experience? And do you run company-wide employee engagement surveys or any other methods like this for gathering feedback from the wider organization?
We do. So it's bi-weekly. We do run bi-weekly engagement surveys. That's where that feedback question I just mentioned can pop up, and when it's turn in it, not every 2 weeks is it the same questions being asked at all. Yeah, so we do that. That does not sit in my team specifically. That sits more with the people business partner teams. Yeah. So they're responsible for the engagement survey and the data that comes out of it.
Yeah. Interesting.
But actually, can I add to that though?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to mislead your listeners. While the people business partners are responsible for it. It's really the leaders who are responsible for using it, right? So the people business partners are the ones where it sits centrally, and they're the ones who are responsible for ensuring leaders know how to use the tool with their teams. But it's really the leader's responsibility to work with their team directly on what the engagement survey or the engagement data is feeding back out. So I just want to make that clear that it's not the PVP's responsibility. Their role in this is much like my teams. It's the enablement, but it really sits with the leaders and the teams. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that clarification. And so you're 1 year in. What does the next year have in store for you? What are the all of the priorities that you still feel like need to get to?
Oh, God. There's so many, but luckily we do have a roadmap, so I can speak to a couple, right? So obviously we're finishing up the launching of performance management, but then that doesn't stop, right? Because now it's then about feedback gathering and data gathering and iterating and evolving, right? So when we look forward to the back half of this year and then the first half of next year is really continuing to iterate and evolve on the people growth and impact cycle, following very closely behind that and very, very tightly related is need to then look at other potential experiences or mechanisms for talent management, meaning like talent planning, succession planning. We're big enough now that we should be thinking about those things, and we don't really have them in a meaningful way yet. So that's on the pipeline following or while we're continuing to iterate and evolve performance management. When it comes to then leadership, we recently aligned about a month ago on the Vinted Leadership Way, which is basically a collection of 4 attributes or 4 principles of what makes a successful leader at Vinted. And then within those 4, there's about 16 different kind of attributes or behaviors that demonstrate those attributes. And so we're now building out a Leadership Way library, which will be a curated resource of e-learnings if we make them, or of just curated free content and resources that exist, but then also validated ways to potentially use your learning budget. So if you find you're like, I'm a leader and I need to be more reflective, I go to that part of the Leadership Way library and I'm like, here's a multitude of ways I could potentially do that, including even some ways to spend my learning budget, right? So that'll be a huge priority because, again, leadership is never done. And so I'll be constantly building that out. And then lastly is, well, I said earlier, for when it comes to learning, we put a lot of emphasis on individuals owning their own learning. We do want to be more intentional about building out team-based learning products. So I already alluded, we have one around feedback, right? So that's where magic really happens. That's where the rubber hits the road. When an individual goes to, say, a feedback training on their own, yeah, they have to work on themselves to adopt behavioral change, but then they go back to a room that's filled with 7 or 8 other people modeling the status quo. That's really hard, versus if all of them went through the same thing together, they can hold each other accountable to adoption and they all have a common language. And so we do want to put more emphasis further down the road on building out team-based products, because it is shown that adoption and team effectiveness moves much faster when people learn together versus when they learn individually and then try to come back together.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One thing that I'm curious about, through all of these products that you've been implementing, are there any beliefs that you previously held about the way that things should be done that you've kind of done a 180 degree on and completely changed your point of view on?
There's one that's coming up for me, and it's probably controversial still because we haven't flushed it out within Vinted. Our approach to this is pay for performance. I come from worlds that are super pay for performance. I mean, Nike, one of their mottos when you work there is no finish line, and then Nike makes their living on driving people's performance. That's what their products exist for, right? So Nike is definitely a very awesome place to work. I don't mean this in a negative way, but it is very much a pay for performance place to work. But as I've now made this transition in my career and I've dug more into behavioral science and understanding more of neuropsychology and neuroscience and motivation and really explored this space, I'd say as recently and worked in performance management, I'd say as recently as probably the last 4 to 8 months, I've really started to change my thinking around pay per performance, right? And so I'm still not fully, my mind isn't fully changed yet, but I am being turned upside down because I very much, pardon me, I very much was very much of that mindset. Like, and now I'm starting to think differently about that and how money is used to motivate people, or and how should it be used, and is it really the best motivator of performance, or are there other mechanisms for motivating performance, and money should be used in a different type of way? And when you think about like compensation and pay for performance,
Interesting. Yep, that sounds like
that is no commentary on Vinted. Let me make that clear. That is just me and kind of what I'm starting to struggle with on my own. Vinted, we have not, we actually haven't had this conversation yet, where we're perfectly going to land in this way of thinking.
Yeah. Really interesting. And then more broadly, are there any other like particular trends in the people growth and development world, or anything that you're seeing on the horizon that you're particularly excited about?
I mean, I think what I'm super excited about, and it's thanks to COVID, is work, I think, is becoming more human and becoming more flexible. So I think a lot of how work was set up was for a different type of work in a different era. Same with management. Management was set up for a different type of work in a different era as well. And I think COVID forced a lot of organizations to rethink not just when and where people work. That's one nice aspect too, but it's brought just this humanity to work that was previously. But I have a kid. I mean, I'm not going to let you know about the kid because I don't want to be perceived as I'm a slacker because I got to cut out 2 hours early to go help out my kid, pick them up from school or whatever, right? And so it's allowed us to be more human. It's opened the windows into us as humans, not just colleagues and workers. And I think that humanity piece is starting to spread into other places of work. Kind of a lot of what I was just talking about with asking for feedback versus giving it, right? That's taking a more human approach there, or separating 360 feedback from a salary increase, because just how our brains work, we're not going to receive that feedback as well. So I think we're starting to see companies and organizations look more at what is best for a human being to thrive and kick some ass from a human perspective. And I think that's just now the spark has really just ignited. And I think that's something that is going to really start to burn more brightly over the next 3 to 5 years in organizations.
Yeah, certainly a positive change that as you say is it's all been ignited by COVID, hasn't it? Which is one of the positives that come from the whole experience.
Exactly. I mean, it's so awful how many millions have died from COVID, but if COVID actually has the impact I think it can on creating a place where work is more human, the actual mental well-being, and then thus physical well-being and livelihoods of even more people could be impacted in a really, really positive way. And so while this is a tragic, terrible freaking thing that happened over the last 2 years, out of it could really rise an amazing, beautiful phoenix of well-being and flourishing and thriving for humanity, right? Humans in general on all parts of the globe.
Yeah, absolutely. I have one more question to round out, and that is that I noticed on your LinkedIn profile you describe yourself as a servant leader, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on what that means to you and how it impacts the way that you approach your work.
Yeah. Let's see. So what does that mean for me? I mean, without the rule is you're not supposed to define something with the word itself. So saying I lead to serve, or my role as a leader is to serve others, is kind of cheating, right? So I think probably the easiest way to answer this is to go back to how I was describing, like how I approach leadership, like at Nike in my commercial world, right? I had colleagues that focused on customer experience. I had colleagues that focused on operational excellence or product or this sort of thing, where they put their stake in the ground. For me, it was people and putting them first and what they need to be able to accomplish the things we need them to do, right? And so you can have the most awesome product, but if you don't have people that are enabled to know how to sell it and market it, what's the point of that awesome product? You may have this gloriously efficient operational process, but if there aren't people who are eager to execute it and understand how to execute it, what's the point of having that operational process, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me, servant leadership is putting the needs of your people first, not before the organization, but putting them first before your own, of course, to a certain degree, because you also need to take care of your own well-being. That doesn't mean do their job for them, right? But putting their needs first and ensuring they just have what they need to be able to do what we're asking them to do, to have fun doing what we're asking them to do, and to get better at doing what we're asking them to do, right? And then that way, all these other things of any type of organization, business or otherwise, can take care of themselves if you have leaders that are really nurturing their people. And so that's when I think of servant leadership, that's kind of how I personally define it. Now, there obviously are more academic definitions, but that's what it means to me.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Michael, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation, and we've loved having you on the show. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Andy. And this was fun. This was cool. It's weird to talk about myself and my team this much. So in some ways, this was a nice kind of little refreshing break to reflect and be forced to articulate the stuff about us. So thank you for asking.
Great. Thanks again. Thanks for listening to this episode of People Over Perks by Leapsome. We're available on the Leapsome YouTube channel and all major podcasting platforms, so you can hit subscribe to receive each episode as it's released. We also have an email newsletter and a Slack community where you'll find great resources and discussions on how to build a high-performing, humane and diverse company culture. You can find the link in the show notes, or you can head to the resources section at leapsome.com. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.